Here we got a question here.
Not a question, an announcement.
An announcement.
Yeah. I'd like to have a little transport meeting tomorrow morning after the talk.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, is that okay? It should be hopefully very brief. I just want to...
Dear Ajahn, with lots of domestic travellers here, travel arrangements are complex. We will have a travel meeting after the talk tomorrow at 9 a.m. so people can meet the people I've buddied them up with and confirm back drivers, etc. So that's after the talk tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay. So how's that going to work with the first interview tomorrow?
That person will just hope for the best.
Ah, that's a good idea. So I'll see who the... Is there any nuns tomorrow for the first interview tomorrow? I don't know who's the first interview tomorrow.
They won't be the first. They're usually the last.
Okay. You're the first interview tomorrow? Okay, you've got your own car, haven't you? Okay, so I say you can be free from the meeting.
I didn't include them in my master spreadsheet.
Okay, excellent. Very good. The other thing is, again, tomorrow is the last day for the interviews. Saturday? No, is it not? Friday. No interviews on Saturday. So if you're not enlightened by Friday, it's a waste of time having an interview. So people have already got their names down. So hopefully that will work out okay. Anyway. Please hold interviews Saturday, the first question. Okay, but that would mean do you want interviews on Saturday? Okay, so they will start at 4 a.m. That's the only free time we got on a Saturday. We have the breakfast, the meditation beforehand and chanting, then the breakfast. And after the breakfast, we have basically the meeting, actually to the last bit of information, and then we have the metta meditation in the morning, and then we have the monks go back and have some lunch. And the lunch, you're welcome to go to Bodhinana for some lunch. Or are you going to fast? Yeah. and then in the afternoon, people have left. So basically, there cannot be any interviews on Saturday. Give me a break.
You left out the most important part, Ajahn. The 500 photographs you have to take.
Oh, boy. What? No, they say 500,000. What happens is usually a group photograph, and always at the end of a retreat, that's when the people look the most happiest. You know why? Because they're going home the next day. I remember seeing these really serious retreats, and they're very, very tough. And that's where they always wait for the end of the retreat to take the photographs. And people actually tell me, look at this, they all look so happy. They must be enlightened. No, it's because they're going home. So anyway, do some photographs, but please try and be sensitive. You don't always need your own photograph. We can take one. There's a thing called like emails and what's it called, sharing or whatever. You don't need to send any to me. I don't know why you send things to me, because I just need to look in a mirror. I can see what I look like. So anyway, but if you want to take the photograph, fine. But take it like a joint photograph and put your name down so it can be shared online or something. Much better. That makes more sense? Emails, yeah. So it's no problem. So it just takes 1 minute. And also, if you want to be in the photograph, don't just go out and queue up for the toilet, because we can't take photographs inside the toilet. You just come in here and just do some restraint, hold on. You know that one of these Thai forest monks, we were just visiting Ajahn Chah, like a memorial day years ago. And afterwards, Ajahn Liam, a very great monk, but he suggested if anyone wants to go to visit Ajahn Mahabua afterwards, that he'd arrange some buses for the monks, for the Sangha. And so there's a lot of people wanted to go in the bus to visit Ajahn Mahabua. And then he said, but there's not much time. So he said, we can't stop for toilet breaks on the way, even though it's about 3 or 4 hour trip. And this is no joke. He came down the bus with plastic bags and little elastic bands to put in the plastic bag, to tie up the plastic bags. We were monks, forest monks, so you just had to go in the bus and we can actually empty out the plastic bags at the end of the journey. That's forest monks in buses. Would you like to do that? No. But anyway, the monks rebelled and we had to stop at the toilet stops. But that was true. That's Ajahn Appy was there on that trip too. Anyway, I've been supporting a person with motor neuron disease pastorally, and she has decided to the process of voluntary assisted dying. I promised her to continue to support her spiritually and be present during her day of dying. If she asks me to open the bottle of the medicine that will assist her dying, am I part of the reason she dies? What will be my karmic consequences? Many years ago, we had one of our conferences here in Perth, and it's wonderful to actually, you have to make decisions like this. Is it right? Is it wrong? So I decided to have one of the presenters was this man, Dr. Nitschke. He was the one who was the president of Exit International, I think it was called. And in the newspapers, they called him Dr. Death. You know what the newspapers are like. But instead of just criticizing or judging him, I said, well, please come along and present at our conference. Did you come along to that, Eileen? The first global conference on Buddhism over here in Perth. He was one of the presenters. Because I always wanted to know exactly what is it? What do you actually do? If it's voluntary assisted dying or voluntary euthanasia, it has to mean what it says. It has to be that person making the choice. No one else can get involved. Maybe you could, what they actually do, first of all, they have to go through so much counseling, first of all, to make sure they are not depressed, they're not just doing this on a whim, they've got good reasons, and at that time it had to be a terminal disease with very, very little chance of any recovery. And then, most importantly, they had to make sure it was a conscious decision they wanted to do this. And so they put a drip in their arm, and then it was connected to another, the plastic tube, and there was the stuff which would terminate their life if it was released into the bloodstream. And they had to go through this computer program, and they had to ask, they asked them, do you know what you're doing? Are you sure you know? Questions like that. And do you realize that if you press this button, that, you will die? And it had to be totally clear. It was their decision to do this. And because it's on a computer, just pressing buttons on a screen, they could, even though they may have been very weak, they can still always do that. And there was lots of kind of even tricks to make sure they could actually see what was going on. And the danger of that, obviously, was they were being coerced into that by some relation who was a bit hard up and wanted the will to come pretty quick. All those little questions had to be answered and avoided. And then finally, after, I think it was about half an hour or something, quite a long time, even longer, I'm not sure, I can't remember now, they had to answer every one of these questions carefully. And if they answered every one of these questions, the last one was, if you press this button, you know what's going to happen? And they had to know very clearly, and they pressed that last button, and these chemicals were secreted into their bloodstream, and they died. Died actually quite peacefully. Sometimes I find it hard to reconcile, that sometimes you have these stories about executions in places like United States, and they can't find like a quiet, peaceful way, to terminate. That's obviously wrong, but why can't they, do what people with voluntary assisted dying do? They always die really peacefully. I'm not quite sure what the problem is there, but anyway, it becomes, as a Buddhist, not against the precepts, because you're making that decision yourself. A free, clear decision to terminate your own life. It is not right to terminate other people's life. It has to be your decision. You make that final punch on the computer screen to terminate your life. And you have to have good reasons for that. And I don't know if any of you have worked in palliative care, but people always say, you don't need to do that. We've got these amazing medicines these days. People have already said that. But in my own experience, what they say and what actually happens are two different things. I still remember one of the Buddhists who was in the hospital. He was dying in the palliative care unit in the hospital of lung cancer. And one of these old people who had been smoking all their lives. And he had such a hard time just even breathing. So difficult. That's when he asked me, it was a rhetorical question, not an accurate one. Can you please, out of kindness, take me round the back and shoot me? The dying process was incredibly painful for him. And he knew there was no recovery possible, just enduring hours and hours and hours, actually a few days, of not being able to breathe properly. And there's no solution except the one day when he would take his last breath. When you actually see that, sometimes you can understand why the voluntary assisted dying is legal in many places, like Western Australia now too. I think it's legal here now. Yeah. It has to be your own choice, and the biggest difficulty is making sure it is a conscious choice with good reasons behind it. And one of the things, talking to this and having people ask questions, from Dr. Nietzsche, who actually was in the center of that process. And most people in Australia would actually agree to that. I think a number of people who want to have that as a choice. It has to be voluntary, your decision, making sure it is as best as possible, sort of a wise decision. That is now part of the law here. You can do that. But I don't know those Australians here, if you know that the first person who legally took the voluntary euthanasia choice in the Northern Territory, because the Northern Territory enacted the first voluntary euthanasia allowance permission law many years ago. It was later on repealed by the Commonwealth government in Canberra. The first person who took voluntary euthanasia legally was a gentleman called Mr. Arthur Dent, who was a Buddhist. And I never met him, but those of you who've been here for a while know Ajahn Brahm. I was overseas somewhere, and he came for like a checkup in Royal Perth Hospital here in Perth, and Ajahn Brahm went to see him to discuss, what he was doing and why he wanted to proceed with voluntary euthanasia. And the main reason why he wanted to do that, he had a very painful disease with no chance of any recovery. And he did this, what he said, this was this Arthur Dent, out of compassion for his wife. His wife would just keep on looking after him, and she wouldn't take any respite care. She thought this was her job, to look after the man she loved and committed to, her husband. And so she was always looking after Arthur Dent, Mr. Dent. And Mr. Dent said the main reason why I wanted to choose voluntary euthanasia is painful, but the main reason was to give my wife, the woman I love, liberty. She can be free, instead of having to keep on looking after me all this time. That was his explanation. And sometimes you may disagree with it, but you can't argue with it. It's his choice. What do you think? But certainly the person who just provides that choice, they shouldn't encourage them either way, but if that's what they want to do, it can be allowed. When one dies, if they do not have the inclination to go anywhere, what happens? If they don't have inclination to go anywhere, they stay where they are. They are ghosts. Do you want to be a ghost? No. Why not? You can come and see me. We can have a nice chat. You know, it's a strange thing that, you know, when you're a young monk, you understand what ghosts are. And sometimes you find out these amazing things I never expected. The ghosts, you know, the ghosts are in a lower realm than human beings. You know, under human beings, in samsara, in the cosmology of Buddhism, you've got human beings, and underneath those are animals, underneath those are the ghosts. You know, we're 2 realms higher up. We've got not more power, you know, than the ghosts, according to the hierarchies. But a lot of people are scared of ghosts. You don't need to be. It's ghosts who are scared of you. That's why, you know, I know this monk, I'm very close to him. When he first started seeing some ghosts over in Wat Nana Chat, then I wanted to go up and find out about them. So I approached them. You know what the ghost said? Ah! You can see us! Ah! Honestly, the ghosts are more afraid, especially of monks, than people are afraid of them. The monks and the nuns, you've got more power. You just don't know how to use it. So they started running away. And if there was one of these monks, actually, he still comes to one of the monasteries. It was at Santuti's monastery. I won't tell you who this man is, but you probably guessed by now. This man used to be a monk in Thailand, and he told me that he was sent to one of these monasteries, which was an old charnel ground, so there's lots of ghosts, you know, in that area. A charnel ground where they used to do the cremations in the forest. This is one day he was meditating, and just like you, meditating in your room, he got tired. So he leaned back, he put out his feet, just like you're doing now. But don't get worried, you're safe here. And as he was kind of getting really sleepy, he felt someone tug his leg. And he thought, that must be like a heavenly being, helping me with my meditation so I'm not so lazy. Thank you. And that's when it kind of started. Then this being, whoever it was, kept on coming into his hut, but then started to be able to associate this being with this really bad smell. And he realized it wasn't a helpful spirit, it was just like a ghost playing around. That's all that ghosts can do, play around. And so after a while, it was always disturbing him. And then, one day he decided to solve the problem. He put another cushion next to him, and when the ghost came, he could smell it coming in, a bad smell. He said quite fiercely, "Ghost, you sit down here and stop messing around." And that's the last time he smelt the ghost or felt him. He chased the ghost away. He should have done that before. Ghosts are afraid of humans, especially monks. That's why we're really good Ghostbusters. But also we give love and kindness to ghosts. That's one of the reasons why our chanting. I've been listening to the chanting every morning and evening. Sometimes the chanting is a bit off key. That's the best chanting to scare ghosts off. Oh no, they don't want to hear off-key chanting anymore. No self-respecting ghost likes to hear that. So that's what happens. If you've got no inclination to go anywhere, you stay here. But when you die, if you realize there's no one to go anywhere, this idea of a self is just like an empty, it's just a process. Then when you have no attachments, not wanting to go anywhere, no cravings, then there's the opportunity not to go anywhere and to disappear. Poof. To have nibbana, to cease. To really let go. Do you understand? No, you don't. If you could understand that, you just get into jhanas all the time. You just be still. What do you want to do anything or go anywhere for? It's easy to understand letting go, isn't it? How many of you can actually do it? You sit there, I just let go. There's nothing to keep, nothing to save. Just a process. And you've had enough with samsara. As I said earlier, do you really want to go to school again? Do you really want to go to medical training all over again? Do you really, I don't know what else you guys and girls do here. Do you really, really, really just want to go to university again and go through this all over again? How many of you have had enough of that story about Nasruddin eating the chili peppers? Always looking for the sweet one. I did tell that story, didn't I? It's a great story. That's why people want to get reborn again. Next time it'll be okay. And it's always the same. Chili peppers are not sweet. They're hot. Anyway, can you please say something about the 4 akatis and how Harata is incapable of them? Is this why the Buddha referred to Sugata? No. Sugata is just one of those epithets, someone who's well gone, disappeared. The agatis, one of them is Chaga. It's the 4 agatis is Chaga, and there must be dosa in there, avijja, and the fear. And of all of those 4 agatis, it's when you're making any decision, you shouldn't actually, or you're in a position of authority, you never make any decision from the 4 agatis, from personal desire, personal will, stupidity, or through fear. And that last one of fear is one of the most important ones, because sometimes we don't notice that. Sometimes we make a decision so we don't get into trouble. Sometimes we make a decision because we don't want to hurt anybody or offend anybody. Sometimes we do it out of fear. And that's one of the reasons that was really clear and close to me personally when I was doing those ordination for bhikkhunis. Should I do this? Should I not do this? It would be much easier just to follow the line and just, it's just too difficult, let somebody else do it. But then I thought, no, that's just following fear. It's not the right thing to do. And even, as I've often said, but it was an important part in my life, just after about 2 or 3 hours of meeting, with all these monks, and in the end, that they wanted to finish off with this meeting. So they said, Brahmavamsa, Ajahn Brahm, if you agree that those 4 bhikkhunis, that was Ajahn Vayama, Nirodha, Hasapanya, and Seri, yes. If you could agree that those weren't proper nuns, that it was illegal, not right, not valid, then everything will be forgiven and you can come back in the Sangha with all of your friends. For a moment, I thought, that was after 3 hours, that was the final decision. I paused for a minute and thought about it. It would have been so easy for me to say, okay, I agree with you, they weren't true nuns. But you can't lie. I'm a monk. And you can't sort of just tell a fib just because it might be easier for you. And I remember just that story of the Akatis. If you make a decision, even though it might be easy for you, nevertheless you have to make the truthful decision and have no fear. So I said, no, there are nuns. So that was the moment where they said, okay, you can't be part of Wat Pah Pong anymore. I always remember that. And it was like an important part in my life. It was like a test to make sure that when you follow what you knew was true, no matter what the consequences, you don't have any fear. You just have to follow that truth. So actually I always remember that. The Akatis, especially when you're in a position of authority, don't act out of fear. Act on what's right. Is inference that all is subject to cessation? Oh, so I started over here. When one sees the shore, please explain what one knows and feels then, without the need of experiencing Nirodha. One can see Nibbana without going through 4 jhanas, immaterial and Nirodha. Is Nirodha similar to Parinibbana? Your answer probably, why have I got so many questions? An inference are always subject to cessation. As the inference may not be a verbal one, how would you say one knows the inference has been made? I would like to thank you to put into words. I would like for you to put into words. Thank you. I think you're asking about the experience of being a stream winner. Because when a stream winner, they have this simile from the Buddha of the shipwrecked sailors. Actually, I made it the simile of the shipwrecked sailors. I think it was a valid inference, assumption, because it was the Buddha saying about these people in the middle of the ocean. And I often thought, if you're in the middle of the ocean in those days, it's likely you were shipwrecked. So anyway, there was these, six men shipwrecked in the middle of the ocean. And the first man in the ocean tried to keep afloat, but went straight down and died, drowned. The second guy was bobbing up and down in the middle of the ocean, but eventually got tired out and sank and drowned. The third guy, he was hard keeping his head above water, but he managed to float. He never drowned. And the fourth guy, he was floating in the ocean, kept his head above water, and as he was looking around, as you do, bobbing up and down with the waves, he could actually see there was dry land not so far away. And the next guy, the fifth guy, having seen this dry land over there, started swimming towards it as the fifth guy. The sixth guy has swam so close to land, he didn't need to swim anymore. He could actually touch the bottom, the dry land, or touch land underneath his feet. He was just like in close to land in the surf. And the last guy had waded to the shore and was sitting under the coconut tree, safe, having a beautiful feed of fresh coconut. I added the coconut bit. But those, is it 6 or 7? 7, yeah. The 7 shipwrecked sailors. The first 3, those were the ones, one who sank down. That was because basically his virtue was very weak. He hadn't really trained himself that well. So, he just couldn't keep his head above water. He sank and drowned. The second one was the average person. They go up and down in life. Sometimes you're good, sometimes you're not so good. And so eventually he got tired out and drowned. The third one was the virtuous person. Because of virtue, you can keep your head above water. The fourth guy, he was virtuous, and because of his virtue, he could look around, and there he saw safety, dry land. That's a simile for the stream winner. You see dry land, safety. And the fifth fellow, of course, what would you do when you see dry land? You try and swim towards it. And that's the once returner on the way. The next guy, he got so close to the dry land, he could actually feel the what do you call it? The shore anyway, just the solid earth underneath his feet. So he didn't just swim anymore, he was wading to the shore. That's the non-returner, really close. And the last man, or I'm not saying women in the ocean, because I think women are too clever to go in boats which are going to sink. I don't know, I'm trying to get out of that one. Well, I keep saying men. But anyway, that last person, they had waded to the dry land. They didn't need to strive anymore or swim. They could sit under the tree enjoying a nice coconut. So those are the simile of enlightenment, the stages of it. And I like the idea of you see safety. You understand what the problem is, and you can actually see there's an end of samsara, an end of suffering for you. That's the stream winner. How that occurs is mostly just seeing non-self. There's no one in there. And that's similar to that saying which I alluded to, didn't say in full, of Ajahn Brahm. After having a wonderful meditation, because he gave a great talk, I went to go and see him just in the sauna. He was walking the opposite direction. We had to pass. And then he stopped and he read my mind. And it's amazing I can say that. You actually could feel him inside of you. And at that particular time, I was happy he was reading my mind. For once, my mind was actually pretty nice to read. I wasn't embarrassed. He didn't ask me, "You're thinking about your girlfriend, please send her a bottle for some of her feces." Nothing like that. He looked at me, and then he decided to try and just add that last ingredient to enlighten me. And what he said, you've all heard this before, Brahma Wangsa. Why? It was fierce like that. He just wanted to emphasize the importance of the question. Why? And I was honest, and I said, I don't know. I was just basically learning the ropes of Buddhism and just trying to understand the Dhamma. And I wouldn't make anything up. So I said, I don't know. And instead of being disappointed, he just laughed. All the time when I acted stupidly, he would just find it so funny. He would never scold you. He would just laugh his head off. When he stopped laughing, he said, well, if anyone asks you that question again, I will tell you the answer. And that made me really interested. It's just myself. I was getting this special teaching on enlightenment from Ajahn Brahm. And that's when he said, if anyone asks that question again, the answer is, there is nothing. That's the answer to the question why. There's nothing. In Thai, because you record this, it was my, me, arai. There's nothing. And then he asked me, really with a huge amount of compassion, do you understand? Brahma Wangsa, do you understand? And I said, yes. And his next answer was, no, you don't. As well as other downers. You had this wonderful opportunity, you didn't understand it or take it. But he told me the answer, so you can reflect on that afterwards. The answer to the question why, there's nothing. There's nothing. If you can understand that, really understand that, then you see the far shore. You see safety. Emptiness, non-self, nothing. Then there's safety. And so that you have that vision, that understanding of non-self. And eventually that just, a stream winner, that seeps itself into you over many years or lifetimes. It's not you just see that. That becomes how you perceive and how you think. It becomes, your way of understanding the world. And sometimes that can take a few lifetimes. But once you see that, you're a stream winner. Basically, you've seen the far shore, you've seen safety, of course you're going to swim towards it, as best you possibly can. And that becomes your once returner. And then when you get so close, you're close to the shore, you can feel dry land, solid land under your feet. You just start wading to the shore, and that means you're a non-returner. You're really so close. And then just you become an arahat afterwards. Hopefully that answers the question, because the question was kind of all over the place. Inference that all is subject to cessation. It's not just inference, that it's actually seeing it, knowing it. When you have some strong experiences, it's not really inference anymore. It's like seeing. Can't be any other way. Does that make sense to you? Do you understand? No, you don't. Anyway, dear Ajahn Brahm, I have got poor self-esteem and self-esteem and self-confidence due to badly bullied as a child for appearance and not being the smart kid. Up until this now, I was always the last few people wherever I have gone. Done a lot of self-love and applied your teaching. Still some work to be done. However, I have managed to have a reasonable life so far. Hope one day I will have good meditation and realize anatta and free myself from the past belief with mega respect and gratitude. Of course you will. All that idea of poor self-esteem, not being respected, that really hurts. But you learn in meditation to let go of that past, to be free from it. And you go to good people, you get influenced by the good people, the positive people, and you change. And maybe whoever you are asks that question, when you go back home after this retreat to the people who know you. A lot of times you ask them or they just tell you, you've changed. You're more confident. You've got more sort of self-esteem. And even though you say, well, actually there's no self in there anyway, what's the problem? But it's an ability that you can respect this process called your stream of consciousness much better. And you see the other people who bully you, they're the ones who should be worried. Okay, I know this is one of those sayings which I have. Please don't be offended by it. because in Australia, we use words with different meanings. And so I remember this saying, and I printed it out, and I even got it on little stickers. There's no need to seek revenge when someone has hurt you. No need to seek revenge because karma will get the bastards anyway. See, the word bastards is not such a bad word. Sometimes that people in Australia, they go to the pub, and they meet their old friends. How you going, you old bastard? It doesn't mean a term of offence. So that's when I can say karma will get the B-A-S-T-I-D-S anyway. Have you got any anger to anybody in this world? It's people who have really mistreated you, and you don't need to seek revenge. Karma will get the anyway. So it relieves you of the burden of having to be the executioner, the punisher. It all works out somehow or other. And that means you're more free to be peaceful. And you don't take what people say. Has anyone ever judged you? People have done that to me. They judged me. So you don't know much about me. It's hard for me to judge myself. Why did I tell that terrible joke? And at first I thought, you shouldn't tell jokes like that. You're supposed to be a monk. But then I think, I'm not going to be judged by you. That's who I am. You know the package now. You see me online. If you expect to come on these retreats and don't hear bad jokes, you haven't done your research. It's your fault for coming here, not me for being Ajahn Brahm. One of those jokes. Someone was trying to put me down. And how they put me down, it was these 14-year-old girls from Mercedes College in Perth, one of the private Catholic schools in the middle of Perth. And they asked me can you please go and teach some meditation or teach some Buddhism there, which I happily did. And the next day, in the middle of town, I was walking for some sort of appointment, and these 3 or 4 girls walked past me, and they stopped. She said, "You're the monk who gave that talk at our school yesterday." And my response was, I'm very happy that you enjoyed it and you remember me. And their response was, "We'll never forget you." And I thought, how sweet. How can you ever forget a monk whose name is Ajahn Brahm? Women's underwear. So I'm not Ajahn Brahm, I'm Ajahn Brahm. They just tried to wind me up. I thought it was a very funny way of winding me up, so I always remembered it. Okay, so instead of having bad self-esteem because of that, I thought it was a great storyline to share with everybody again and again and again. That's my name. Okay, dear Ajahn Brahm, that's Ajahn Brahm, thank you. Growing up, I happened to see some interesting occurrence where one gets possessed by a being which people say tells the future or things you should watch out for the year. Some of my relations said it is a heavenly being, i.e. God of earth. Keen to hear your view, I suppose, of this. Which realm do they come from? That's why you can't really be sure. But they've got no being, right to get inside of you or possess you. And sometimes they first come across as like good beings. But then that's just to get you to trust them. And then they start playing around with you. Spirits, even devas, are they wise? If they were, they wouldn't be just going inside of a person like you. So a lot of the times we dismiss the idea of being possessed. It does happen, but it's very, very, very rare. But one of these people I was always really interested in, because he was a very devout Baptist Christian in the United States, and he lived he became well known after the First World War, before the Second World War. And if ever you want to read up on this was fascinating. It was a guy called Edgar Cayce, C-A-Y-C-E, I think in Virginia Beach or something. But anyway, he was a simple guy, but every now and again he'd go into these trances. And when he was in one of these trances, he could actually look at somebody, and he had this disease. He said, "This is what you should take." And the medications were totally just, weird and strange, and didn't make any sense to proper doctors, but the medications worked. He started to get a reputation. One of those stories which I will always remember, because I read his little book, it was fascinating. This patient came to him and he said, that he had this very terrible disease, and so this Edgar Cayce went into a trance, and then he said, "Oh, this is the medicine which will cure you." And so they wrote it down, and they went to the local drugstore. This was before the Second World War. In the local drugstore, they said they'd never heard of it. So they put him in trance a second time. And a second time he said, "This is the drug which will cure you, and you'll find it in this pharmacy drugstore in St. Louis." They were in Virginia when they were doing this. So in those days they couldn't email, they used to use telegrams. They went to the telegraph office, they sent a telegram to this pharmacy in St. Louis, and the pharmacy said, "We've never heard of it, there is no such medicine." So they put him into trance a third time. And the third time they asked him about this medication, he said, "It is in that pharmacy in St. Louis. It's in the back room on the third shelf at the back, and you'll find it there." And that was the email they sent. Oh, not email, sorry, the telegram. Not the telephone, I was going to say. The telegraph they sent. Yeah, okay. And they got the message back. "Found it." And one of the other reasons I was very impressed with this Edgar Cayce was they asked him, just instead of actually asking him to cure people who had such a great reputation for doing this, they asked him, "What's the most important law in the universe?" And you know what he came up with? The law of karma. And when he found out what he said afterwards, he was really shocked. He was a devout Christian. "What am I doing?" But he said, "No, if that's what happened, everything else which I say under trance, I don't know what I'm saying, it must be true." But the reason why it's not a good idea to go into trance like that, because people didn't believe him. But he had so much evidence to support him. So some of the doctors in New York, they said, "Well, we've got to find out if this is true or not true." So they went to see him, put him in trance, and when he was in trance, they got these slivers of wood and pushed them between his fingernail and the skin. Like, it's torture. But he was in trance, he didn't feel a thing. And so when he came out, he could feel a lot then, it was really hurting. But they said, "Oh, we had to do that to prove that, you were for real." So the doctors went up to New York and said, "It's a real thing." And then other doctors said, no, he must have tricked you. So they went down and did the same thing on him. And about 3 or 4 times he was tested out because no doctors believed each other. It can't be true. And then after he said, that's enough. My hands, I can hardly use them at the moment. And that's one of the problems. Anything which is strange, if you do have a possession by somebody, and it's a good thing or something, then no one believes you. This was one thing which, there's a nun, I don't mind saying her name, a nun over in the East, Venerable Chi Kwang Sunim. Her teacher over in South Korea told her, gave her some good advice. If ever you become enlightened, don't tell anyone. Maybe your teacher and a few close friends, but don't tell anybody, because you'll have to spend the rest of your life proving it. I remember that saying, and it's a very wise saying. So if anything weird happens to you, you can tell someone like me, I'll keep it quiet until you pass away. But don't tell too many people. Otherwise, they will doubt you. And that becomes really an awful experience for you and your family. Oh my goodness. Okay. Dear Ajahn Brahm, the single guy here again. Which one? There's a lot of you. But I remember this single guy who came here once. That was this Australian guy. He came to see me in the interviews. It was some time ago. He said when he was meditating, he kept on crying. Just tears came out, and he felt embarrassed by it. So he would get up and just wipe his eyes and just go off and rest or walk or something and do more meditation in private. And he asked me, what's happening? Why am I just crying like this? And he's about 28 or something. And I asked him, said, when was the last time you cried before coming on this retreat? And that's when he told me that when he was about 15, his father told him, he was like an Aussie guy in the bush somewhere, and his father told him, Aussie men don't cry. He felt ashamed of crying. He felt it was hindering him. So anyway, I told him, well, you've got a lot of crying to catch up on. And so he sat in this room, he wasn't embarrassed anymore. He cried so much when he was here. Of joy a lot of the time. But he told me afterwards, because he wasn't embarrassed of crying, and he was a young man, single, he got so many propositions afterwards from the ladies. He thought it was so sweet that he was crying. I'd never seen a young Australian man like that before. So whoever this single guy, cry a lot. It's true. Not you monks, obviously. You're not allowed to cry. Again, I read a poem by Kandipada which I thought is so relevant for us all, with much metta. It's called A Lot of Fuss. A lot of fuss, a lot of people, a lot of time, a lot of trouble, a lot of tears, a lot of money, all for what? A little body, a blob of proteins. Fast unwinding, a little corpse, quick decay, no longer is it dear father, dear mother, or any darling other. Please turn over. Hasn't finished yet. In spite of this, we must have consolations and coffins, processions and tombstones, parties and mournings, rites and rituals, buried or burnt, embalmed forever, all for these little bloated bodies. Sons remember, grandsons little, and after them are the dead forgotten. Stones and bones alone remaining. So this is not a lot of nonsense. If you look at it from a distance, it is true it's a lot of nonsense. But if you look at it close up, somebody, if you're going through some understanding, of life and death, or of loss and gain, sometimes we need to do those ceremonies. And the point of like a monk or a nun who's conducting those ceremonies is to learn how to make them meaningful. You have an opportunity. When I give talks, some of you listen, because you've got nothing else to do on an evening talk. But when you do like a marriage blessing or a funeral, everybody listens. You got people's attention there, because this is an emotional thing they just can't understand. And so you don't want ever to do theories or what beliefs are or what it says in the books. It's much better to understand how it feels and why it feels that way and how we can get past things like grief. One of the experiences I always remember is that when I was in Thailand as a monk, for 9 years, living mostly in this, again, charnel ground. In Wat Nana Chart, that's where the villagers surrounding would do their cremations. So there would be a cremation maybe once every a week or 2 weeks. And one of the things we insisted on, they had a very cheap coffin, but we'd always go up on top of the pyre to have a look at it before we burnt it, so people could actually see a dead body. You could touch it and actually get to know it and not be afraid of it. And that was one of the benefits there. But also, because it was close to everybody, I never saw any of the family members cry when there was a cremation. And some of those deaths were tragic. But nevertheless, there was an acceptance and understanding of loss without grief. And after so much seeing that for such a long time, you came to the conclusion that in that culture, grief was not there. Loss was. They had developed a culture as part of their deep, simple Buddhist teachings. That meant they would lose somebody, but didn't have this terrible grief which we have in the West today. That actually disappeared after, when I used to go back to visit, people started to feel sad. But in those days, there was no grief. That was amazing. I said that's also one of the reasons why when my own father died, I never cried. I didn't feel grief. Loss, yes, but not grief. Why do you cry so much? Anyway, that's sometimes what you can learn. And once you can do that, it's much better. We can have the sense of respect for someone who's passing away without sort of the grief element to it. The grief can actually stop us from doing everything, and we get obsessed by the person who's passed away. Anyway, what is the relationship between peace and giving permission to allow real peace without doing it? That's the only way that you can experience peace. If you say you want to make peace, even, I sometimes say that, you don't make peace, just make more burdens you have to do. Like peace is always there. My favorite type of peace is called mushy peace. Oh, come on. I'm just trying to make it interesting because I thought you were going to sleep. Mushy peas is this. They used to store like the dry peas, and then because it was hard to get fresh stuff, in the early days when you were poor, and you just soak it overnight and then boil it up, and that was mushy peas. Is that poor people's food? But anyway, the relationship between peace and giving permission to allow real peace without doing it, this is how the simile of the glass of the cup of water. How do you keep the water to be still, to be peaceful? You can't make it peaceful. You put it down and let it be peaceful. That's how to meditate. And I thought you knew that simile so much, I do it so often. If it was a real glass, you can see the water. It's still moving. But you can see the reflections of the light. That tells me it's still moving, but it's stopped now. It's still. I never did it. I let it happen. I allowed it to be put down. Now, many of you, when you're meditating, you try to let go and your mind is getting quite still. The breath is getting nice and even. And what do? Are you still yet? No, come on, I haven't got all day. We've only got 1 or 2 days of the retreat left. Come on, be still. Maybe because I put it over there, I should put it over here. Maybe because this should be this way around. You don't give it the time to be still. Maybe I'm not doing it right, I should do more metta. Maybe I shouldn't be sitting down, maybe I should do some walking. Maybe I didn't sleep well at night. Maybe I just, just let it become still. That's when you give permission for the water to be still. And then you find it's peaceful. You didn't do anything. Dear Ajahn, how might someone become aware of the non-existence of a fixed and permanent self as they grow through the different experiences in life? When you go through the experiences of life, they're so confusing, they're so fast, and you don't have that much idea of who's doing what. And you get frustrated, you get disappointed. What you want to do, what you want to have happen doesn't happen the way you want it to. And so after a while you do things like retreats. And on retreats, life is really simple. You don't have to do anything here. That's why people like going to caves or walk over to Bodhinyana Monastery. It's something to do. If you were really smart, you say, what's a cave? It's just another space. This is like a cave. So why don't you just stay here? Because people want to see the cave. If you really want to see the cave, I can take a photograph of it and give it to you tomorrow. There's photos of it. Why do you want to go in the cave? Sometimes it's a distraction, isn't it? Why do you want to take photos of the retreat center? I remember going off to India on pilgrimage when I was about 21, I think. And one of the reasons I went there was not just to go to the holy sites. I always wanted to see the Himalaya mountains. I saw like a picture of them and I was so impressed. I want to see it live. But when I went there, it was during the rainy season. You couldn't see the Himalaya mountains, just clouds on the northern horizon. So after about a week or two I gave up. No way I'm going to see the Himalaya mountains. And so one day I was in Kathmandu and I was told by I was staying in the youth hostel there, I was told by other travellers, there's a post office bus which took like parcels and letters to the northern part of Nepal, right up to the border with Tibet. So that's a cool little journey to do. I was traveling with two other Americans, and when the bus stopped for lunch, I didn't really want any lunch, same as the Americans, we decided to just walk up a hill and see what's on the top, just something to do. When we got to the top of this hill, the clouds parted. You could see the whole range of the Himalaya mountains stretched from east to west on the northern hemisphere, northern horizon. Wow! One of the things I really wanted to do was happening, see the Himalaya mountains. The two Americans sat down. I realized I'd left my camera in the post office bus, so I ran down the hill to get my camera. This was the chance of a lifetime, and ran back up again. It took about half an hour, down and up. And as soon as I got to the top of the hill, you could just see the clouds close in. And the two Americans, they said, "Where did you go? This was amazing." I felt such a dummy. And later on, when I remember that, I always thought that was Mara teaching me a lesson. You can't capture beauty. You can't put it on a photograph. That's only a fraction of what it's really like. So I don't know why people want to have a photograph session after the retreat is over. It will never capture it. Okay. Dear Ajahn, can you explain again how to tell if close ones, relations, friends, loved ones, want to live or die just by holding their hands and feeling their intention? Look, you try it, you have enough of an open mind to be sensitive. So first of all, you can hold their hands or be close to them. Ask the question, Mum, do you want to live? Are you tired? Do you want to die? If you ask the question, it's amazing just how you get an answer. You can feel it. Once you feel that answer, you've got to trust it. If you're doubting it and say, well, let's try it again. No. You ask the question, keep your mind still for just a few seconds. You'll understand the answer. It's not being psychic. This is your mother. There's a connection there with you. Of course there'll be a connection. You ask the question. See what happens. Okay. Hi Ajahn. Hi. What do you tell someone who wants to disrobe? If you want to disrobe, don't do it in here. Then people might take photographs of you. Seriously, I told this to this young monk. Actually, I think he's still around. He used to be called Pamuto. He's actually over very close to where John Barter is staying right now. I lost contact with him a long time ago. But anyway, he told me that sometimes, actually I told him this, he wanted to disrobe. I said, look, if you really want to disrobe, that's the wrong time to do it. Because you're confused. So when you want to disrobe, don't. But wait until that sort of problem is over, and then ask yourself again. And if that problem is over, there's no point to disrobing. So when you want to disrobe, wait. When you don't want to disrobe, then you don't need to disrobe. And that's what I told him. He said, Ajahn Brahm, that's unfair. But for many years he did that. And he always noticed that the wanting to disrobe, like anything else, passed. It's only a temporary way of looking at life, a bit of negativity, but he never acted upon it. He waited for it to disappear. And when it disappeared, he didn't need to disrobe. And I got the reputation, if any monk wanted to disrobe, don't go and see Ajahn Brahm. Because I love being a monk too much. And that was from the very early days. I've told a few people this story. When I was ordained as a novice monk in one of these big temples in Bangkok, the first 3 nights I'd been ordained as a novice monk, and it's honest, I had nightmares which woke me up in the middle of the night. And my nightmare was that I was a layperson. And I just opened my eyes, still lying on my mat on the floor, and I saw my robes folded up next to my bed. It was only a nightmare, not real. I'm in the brown robes, yes. And then I fell asleep. For 3 nights the same dream occurred. And that kind of told me something, just how much I really wanted, not just superficially, but deep down I wanted to be the monk. And I would tell people, after that experience, they asked, how long are you going to become a monk for? I said, forever. Oh, yeah, they all say that. It was right. It's not quite 50 years yet, but 49 and a half or something, that's a pretty long time. I think I could say that that was an accurate dream. Do you agree? Can you please explain what the conclusion or takeaway of the 5 fingers story is this morning? Thank you. The takeaway from that is, when the retreat is over, instead of standing around and talking with each other, if you haven't got jhanas yet, please help extra with the cleaning. At least you can make some more merit. That makes you more important. What it does, we judge what is important and who is important in a totally wrong way. It's the people who do this cleaning in the background. They're the ones who, like someone like Robin, appreciates more than anybody else. Don't worry about donations. Just do the cleaning. And it's a humbling way of spending half an hour, and it's a beautiful thing you're doing. That's a takeaway. Okie dokie. The person having nightmares. Wow. I was just talking about nightmares, and I say again. The person having nightmares of loved ones dying. Oh, it's not loved ones dying. It's the fact that the person having nightmares, you're a lay person. That was me. I'm a monk. Wonderful. The person having nightmares of loved ones dying might like to try contemplating this in meditation. For years I had a recurring nightmare that my mum had died and I would wake up sobbing. It stopped when I became a Buddhist and started doing death contemplation. Does that make any sense to you? It's not a question, but it's just a comment. Wake up sobbing. When you do death contemplation, one of the things is, we all must die sooner or later. One of the things I did to make the death contemplation more interesting, suppose that the person who did the most cleaning on this retreat, I got this from Robin, they did the most cleaning, they will be rewarded. And the reward is with a first-class plane ticket to, I don't know, where would you like to go? To Paris? A first-class plane ticket to Paris. A 2-week stay in a 5-star hotel with reservations at these hotels with only 5-star Michelin-rated chefs. And going to see some of the best performances, musical or plays in the world, all paid for, and $1,000 a day money to spend in the shops wherever you wish to go, for you and your partner. All expenses paid. Would that be a good gift? Would you suppose you won that gift, would you be looking forward to it? Would you be thinking, oh, when can I go? Can I please go before, maybe in the summertime when the weather's really good over there? And when it comes close to the summertime, would you be counting the days? Only another week to go, another 5 days to go, another 3 days to go. I can't wait to go on this amazing holiday, all paid for by the Buddhist Society of Western Australia. What happens if instead of winning that trip, you were told by your doctor, I'm terribly sorry, but you've got this cancer and it's terminal and you're going to die in a week? Would you be afraid? Which is better, going to a heaven realm or going to Paris on a 2-week holiday? Aren't you Buddhists?
Paris.
Paris? Oh, come on. Paris, you go to 2 weeks and it's all over. You go to a heaven realm, wow, you can be up there for such a long time, blissing out, having a wonderful time. So why are people afraid of dying? If you know what's going to happen at death, you don't have fear of dying. Of death, yes, but not of dying. You're kind of free. No worries or problems in the world. Wouldn't you like that? So anyway, if you do win the prize and you prefer going to Paris, what was I going to say? It's much better going to heaven. Why are people afraid of going to a heavenly abiding? Because they forgot what it's like.
Well, I'll invite you along.
To Paris? No, I'll be in heaven. Okay. Anyway. Dear Ajahn, can the appearance of the nimitta seeing one's chitta be affected by one's sila? E.g., might there be imperfections in the nimitta if one's moral conduct isn't 100% pure? Yes. If so, please can you expand upon this moral dimension? Mega gratitude for you, for what you've done and continue to do. I did mention this before, if your virtue is not that good, your nimitta would often appear as like stained and dirty, like a dirty rag. And this was, I first explained this to my attendant who was looking after me in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, on the Buddhist Gem Fellowship. Because when I started talking about nimittas and talking about why sometimes nimittas don't look really powerful or pure, he came up for an emergency interview. And he said, Ajahn Brahm, yeah, I saw a nimitta, it was blotched all over like a rag which had been used to, wipe the floor. It was really dirty. And I said, well, what have you been doing? Is your precepts pure? He said, Ajahn Brahm, I'm sorry, that's the problem. And he felt so guilty. And I said, look, I'm a monk, I've got compassion, but I also know the loopholes. The loopholes are before you meditate, if you're liable to get a nimitta, then just tell yourself, I look for the beautiful part of that nimitta. Focus on that. I'd said that already here, and that's what he did. And so, yeah, a lot of the nimitta was dirty in a rag, but if you see any rag before you put it in the washing machine, there's always part of it which is nice and clear and beautiful and bright and clean. Look at that. And then what you do, you zoom in on it, and you see this beautiful little piece of cloth. You zoom in on that, the most beautiful part, the most beautiful part, and the most beautiful part, the most beautiful part, and the most beautiful part, the most beautiful part, the most beautiful part. You zoom in on this, and the nimitta becomes really bright and beautiful. Even if you've got bad sila. It's harder. The more perfect your sila is, then the more bright and clean that nimitta will be. That's just how it appears. That's how to get past it. But it's best actually not to break any precepts. What do you want to break precepts for? Dear Ajahn, what should be the first question and the last question in life? The first question is, why again? And the last question is, bye-bye. Now the last question is to stop all questions. Be peaceful. All that time which you've practiced meditation, or you've heard things like letting go, peace, just remember that. That's the best thing to do. We don't aspire for anything, you just calm down and be still. And the next best thing you can do is not yawn. The next best thing is usually to remember all the positive things you've done in life and forgive all the bad things. You do that. So you can get a decent rebirth. Anyway, how to block out the hearing sense in meditation is earplugs. You know, over here in Australia, because there's a huge mining industry, that they have really high quality earplugs. And what they do, you go to these, audiologists or something, and they sprinkle some like silicone in your ear, and they let it set, and they take it out, and that becomes the mold. And they make these specially designed earplugs just for you. They fit your ears. And because I traveled a lot and had a hard time sleeping in aircraft, I got some of these. Somebody offered them to me. And I didn't really believe them at first. But then on one sort of like overnight flight, I put them in my ears and to meditate. And when I was meditating, they were so quiet, I fell asleep. It's the first time I'd slept on an aircraft. And then I woke up after about a quarter of an hour. And because I woke up, I needed to go to the toilet, and I went to the toilet. And I remember just noticing how quiet this aircraft is. I forgot I still had my earplugs in. They really worked. And I still use them if I'm going on overnight flights. And you can use them while you're listening to one of my talks. So you don't have to hear the bad jokes. Okay, so anyway, that's how to close the ears down. The other way of doing it is, I think I mentioned this, may have been in interviews, is imagine a big bubble around you. And the bubble is like your space, and all the sounds are outside of you. So you have like this imaginary cave you can be in. And inside you can keep quiet. Outside is where the noise is. Dear Ajahn Brahm, do you believe that Ajahn Chah would have identified as soon as he met you that you had the ability to spread Buddhism so effectively throughout the world with your great wisdom and kindness and exceptional British humour, with much gratitude and respect? He never told me that. So I don't know. Can't answer that. Oops. Dear Ajahn Brahm, I know that sometimes when I asked him to, through a letter to one of the other monks, can I stay a little bit longer in this monastery in the north of Thailand, which was very wonderful for me. And apparently Ajahn Chah did give this big smile. So, he did realise I was up to something good. Dear Ajahn Brahm, thank you for the chanting. I look forward to it each day, and I really enjoy chanting in Pali. I think it's very beautiful. Is that a joke? No, sometimes the Pali is beautiful, and I try my best to chant it in key, but sometimes you've got a sore throat, or you're a bit tired, or you try to keep it to the same tone as the other people chanting. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you really try your best. And I remember once we had these Benedictine monks coming to visit, from New Norcia Monastery. I remember once they asked, in the main hall, they asked, "What's your chanting like?" And I said, "No, not that good." And they said, "Let's hear it." And that was really embarrassing, because these Benedictine monks, when they chant, they're absolutely beautiful. And sometimes they sell like records or CDs of their chanting just to listen to. And they are really just so sonorous and beautiful. They practice. We don't. And so they chanted first, and it was just really a hard act to follow. But then we did it, and they said that was actually beautiful. I never thought that. Because one thing I noticed, when you're right in the middle of the chanting, you're part of like the choir or the sangha doing the chanting. It sounds very different than when you're outside listening to it. One day when I was doing chanting in Thailand, I had to leave early to go out to an appointment. And when I was outside of the group listening to them chant, it really did sound nice. When you're inside it, you can see all the faults. But outside, they all tend to melt away. So you look forward to it each day. Should we actually get a PA system so every hut can listen to the chanting at 6 o'clock and in the evening? Yo! I wouldn't do that. Okay. Okay. I've got a couple of questions here. Then we have the old questions from yesterday, which I think are dead anyway. Idea. As so many interstate overseas people, how about Jhana Grow get a trailer to put in back of the van and do an airport drop-off after retreat? A volunteer can drive, or everyone chip in $20 for petrol and the driver's time. It only makes sense. Can this be arranged? And for all the future too? No. It's much nicer. Look, how far is it to the airport? Kilometers? 80 kilometers? 60 kilometers. 60 kilometers. 60 kilometers, you can usually walk at 6 kilometers an hour. So you can finish the retreat with walking meditation. I mean, it takes about 10 or 12 hours. So if you have to leave tomorrow, if you leave now, 9 o'clock, you'll get there about 7 a.m., a nice time to arrive at the airport. No takers? No, okay. Last question I'm going to do today. There's one monk actually tried that once. He was arriving from overseas, at Perth airport. And I said, what time are you arriving? I can arrange a lift for you. And he said, I'm not telling you. He wanted actually to try whether he had enough good karma to get to the monastery without arranging a lift. Tell me what happened. As soon as the plane landed and he walked outside, he got about 50 meters of walking before a car stopped and said, where are you going? Going to monastery? I can give you a lift. Nothing was arranged. It just happened automatically because Buddhist monks over here, they do have a good reputation, and he had enough good karma that people wanted to give him a lift. I kind of like that idea. So if you want to find out how much good karma you have, anyway, okay, the last question I'm going to answer is already almost 10 past. There are thoughts of conceit that arise for me sometimes, accompanied by thoughts of superiority, better than another, feeling special, ego, etc. Besides meditation, how can one work on this? Thank you. There's a lot of times that judging yourself, you can't judge yourself. I started talking about this but never finished off. It's hard to judge oneself. How can you judge others? When people try and judge me, they only see a tiny part of me. And other people, you don't know why they do those things. What the reasons are. You don't have really time to actually investigate why people do things. And so because of that, it's just so hard to judge yourself as conceited or lack of self-esteem, or judge anybody else why they do these things. And in the end, I always said that whenever you try and judge someone, it's like taking them to court. The problem is for human beings that when you take them to court and someone has hurt you, you want to find out why. Are they responsible? Are they guilty? You are the prosecutor. You are also the judge. And you never give a chance for the defense attorney to say anything. So someone really hurt you. They bang the door, just as you were about to get into jhanas. And you say, that was really wrong. That's really bad. And you start thinking about them and all the terrible things they've done and just all the... It's hard to get into jhanas. This was your chance, your one opportunity. You'll never get this again. It's because of them banging a door. That's really bad. And you don't wait for a defense attorney to speak up for them. You're the judge. You bang the gavel down, guilty, and you sentence them. I'm going to tell Ajahn Brahm about them. Never allowed. Put them on the blacklist for the retreat center. make sure they never have an opportunity to come here ever again. They spoil my enlightenment. It's an unfair trial. Prosecutor, judge, which is you, and no defense. Sometimes if you're angry at someone for talking too long at Q&A time, it's 11 minutes past 9 now, if you're angry at them, then sometimes give the defense attorney a chance why they did this and the effect of it. And try and see, as a good defense attorney would do, any mitigating evidence, any exonerating arguments. And I'd done that purposely when sometimes I was going to get angry at somebody. And I always came up with an open verdict afterwards. I couldn't find anyone guilty. I didn't know what they were doing or why they were doing it for. I didn't have enough evidence, which means you can't get angry at anybody. Why did they do that? Did they do that? They may have been drunk at the time. They may have been tired. They may have just made a mistake like we all do. So how can I find them guilty? And life became so much easier when all these people, other people who have criticized them, would have said they'd done a very bad thing, but I come up with a verdict, I don't know. I can't criticize them for that. I can't make them, condemn them as guilty people. And when you have a verdict like that, life is so much more peaceful. You don't need to punish them, report them. Because you know why? If they did do something wrong, karma will get the masters anyway. Thank you for listening. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Excellent. So these are the ones which I didn't answer yesterday, and to keep the tradition, I haven't answered them again. So that'll be for tomorrow. Thank you again for your questions, and I hope you don't mind me going over time for 10 or 15 minutes, because your questions are important to me. I tried my very best. Sometimes I fail, but I don't judge myself. When I go back to my room, I will look at myself and say, what are the mitigating circumstances? And those are the ones I'll follow. Here we go.